All right, so we're going to go ahead and, you ready? All right, let's do this. All right, so BSides, what's up? My name's Tim Wright, and today we're going to do a discussion on planning and executing red team engagements. And specifically, I want to talk about threat scenarios and delve into how we can use some of this in our environments. Real quick, a little bit about me. I am the current red team lead at American Electric Power. Been there for about 4 years now on the red team. Prior to that, I was on the DHS US CERT red team, and that was fun times. Doing assessments for NASA, various government facilities in DC, Department of Treasury. And then prior to that, I worked at the Air Force Research Labs at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, doing cyber stuff. And we had about 20 years of security IT experience, where about 14 years of that has been mostly offensive type stuff, pen testing, hacking, reverse engineering, that type of stuff. So that is me. So what are we going to talk about today? So war games, right? So a little bit of the talk earlier. We've been hearing about war games and practicing. So I like to play war games, whether it's console or board games or whatever it is. How I'm doing some of that and applying some of those things that I've learned and trying to apply similar techniques into red team engagements. We're going to go through real quick and kind of get everybody on the same board as far as doing a definitions review, terminology review. Then I'll into you exactly what a red team exercise is, because there may be some misconceptions there. Walk through threat scenarios, talk about some assessment planning, things that you can think about if you're going to be doing some of this in your organization, things to mull over. Then I created a organization called Acme Gas. There's a back channel on that. It's kind of funny. This weekend I had a sore stomach and I was trying to come up with the name of a company, and Acme Gas was what I landed with, so you put two and two together. And then we'll talk about reporting, and then I'll give you guys some future further research areas you guys can look at. So real quick, I want to give a shout out, some respect to, there's a lot of really good guys that are doing red teaming, and there's a lot of presentations, a lot of videos online where these folks are presenting. Lars, Varus Group, which is my old company, FusionX, Trusted Sec, and Raphael Mudge, all are constantly talking about red teaming, threat emulation, how to do this successfully. I think all of these companies have developed tools that we can use in our organization, some open source, some commercial. So if you want to do more research into this, there are companies and organizations that are doing this work. So, war games. So I'm a gamer at heart. I don't know about anybody else in here, but I love to play games, right? Board games, card games, video games, you name it. Since I was a kid, I've been doing that hobby, whether it's, again, chits, whatever. Refighting either historic battles or futuristic conflicts with miniatures and whatnot. But when you think about doing that type of activity where you're just hanging out with friends and playing a war game, you can apply some of that mentality to how we red team and blue team with each other, how we're working in security. And I think that's been a mantra we've been hearing over and over today is training, right? Train like you fight. That's a military concept. So some war game examples here, from miniatures, chits to Battlefield 1. Right, all those are kind of fun, but then when we start looking at how we're applying that to the digital space, you've got the DerbyCon CTF guys, been running that for years. Top left, top right is the DEF CON CTF, and then Net Wars, right? So we have these large digital environments that are being set up, very red environment. We go in, we attack, we defend in some cases. There's DFIR challenges in some of these. So, but it pushes us, right, to learn more, to challenge ourselves. And I've known a lot of guys that have done these type of events that wanted to get into pen testing, red teaming, blue teaming, and they started here and then moved over into that space and became very good at what they do. So this is a definite way that we can build some skills. But let me take a sidestep real quick. Let's talk a little bit about engagement types, right? So I think there might be some misconceptions on what we're talking about. So pen testing, when we think about a pen test, and real quick I didn't ask, how many red teamers we got in the room? We got pen testers in the room? We got a few? Okay, cool. Well, hang on then. This is review for you guys. So typically we're talking about a focused vulnerability assessment for a penetration test. You'll hear it referred to a lot as smash and grab. When you think of smash and grab, that could be like when you think of somebody walking into a store and breaking the glass and grabbing all the stuff and running out the front door. Very similar, right? So we're going to try to find vulnerabilities or misconfigurations. We're going to try to exploit those. And the goal is to grab DA, grab elevated credentials in some of these assessments, depending on how they're scoped, right? That very high level. Red teaming is a little bit different. So it's more goal-oriented. Adversarial threat emulation. It's designed to test the security team's readiness to withstand an attack, right? How do they respond? These are going to be run over longer periods of time. They're going to be very stealthy. So you're going to have a piece of malware or some type of rat deployed on the infrastructure, or you're going to try to, with black box, you're going to try to gain some type of access, and you're going to try to move up. But the goal here is much different. Right? And then threat scenarios, it's kind of a blend. Right? So what we're going to be talking about today is more of a blend of the two. Between penetration testing and red teaming, we will define our objectives and goals. But the difference between a threat scenario and a red team engagement is the scope is going to be much more narrow. Right? So we're going to define things that will be in scope and out of scope, and we'll talk about that. So terminology review real quick: red team, blue team, white team. For some of these, if you're setting up as a training engagement, a white team is more like a monitoring team, making sure that one group or the other doesn't step out of bounds or kind of judges, making sure the rules aren't broken when you define the scenario. Purple team is kind of a collaborative effort between blue and red. Dave Kennedy and others have been talking about purple teaming for a long time. I happen to be a supporter of that concept. TTPs. So when you start looking at red teaming, tactics, techniques, and procedures, you're going to understand what your threat actors are doing. Who's going to come after your organization, right? So as you're emulating a threat, you can get it as close to what that actor is doing. So if you're worried about nation state or hacktivism, or if it's just some type of malware that you're concerned about, you want to understand how that malware is deployed, how it looks on the wire, and how you can emulate that. IOCs, indicators of compromise. This is looking at the artifacts. What's happening? What does that footprint look like on the wire, right? And then ROE, this is our rules of engagement. This is defining how we conduct the assessment, right? What's in scope, what's out of scope. Time of testing, do we need to notify somebody when we compromise certain targets, etc. And then white card, this is a concept that I absolutely love. What we do is we assume breach of a target system, right? So in a red team engagement, I hear a lot of people talking about they spend a lot of time on a pen test or whatnot trying to find a way to get onto the network. Well, what we're going to talk about in this is that I don't really care so much about the exploitation phase. I want to see what happens on post-exploitation. That's where we win as a security organization. So when we white card, what we'll do is we'll take our payload, we'll spin that up, put it on a target that we feel is where we want to start our work. We'll execute it, get our callback as a low-level account, and that's where we start. Right? Then we can demonstrate the risk of what happens when somebody compromises these networks. Right? So, red teaming defined. So again, designed to emulate a sophisticated attacker. Right? Generally, we're not going to let the blue team know that we're doing this. It's just going to happen. They're going to start seeing things. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody in the blue team chain is going to know. Their management's going to know. Senior leadership will know. And if they actually see things, hopefully the escalation path is they're not going to pick up a phone, someone in the SOC, and make a call to the FBI. That'll actually trickle up to some manager to make that decision. So the actual folks that are working in the SOC are going to know that this is happening. Again, we're looking at security maturity. How does this organization work? And this is a black box assessment. So your testers that are doing this are going to have absolutely limited knowledge starting off on what's going on inside your organization. Not going to know what firewalls you have, what AV solutions you're running. No knowledge except what they can Google. Open source intelligence will be their friend here. So when we look at security maturity models, so everything from reactive, block and tackle, right, to the left, all the way to more of our risk-based approach, multi-layer security, behavior analytics, etc. on the right, and trying to find out where we land on that scale. Right, so, and there's other models out here that you can use. There's a COVID model. This is on the krebssecurity.com, and I made sure to put links in the paper, so I think there's a way to publish this. You guys can use this. But this is just one really excellent security model we can look at. And then if you start going through this, and I apologize for the font size here, but you can set up your business units, awareness and training, compliance, emerging IT threats, IR, operations and support, your secure development lifecycle, and PMO. You can start to evaluate their levels of maturity from five, which is very mature, all the way down to 1, which is very immature. So again, the takeaway from this, and I want to make sure you understand, this report, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, this is not something that our security teams at a tactical level are going to use. This is going to be going up to your senior executive management. They're going to want to see exactly how the security team is operating within their organizations, right? Usually an independent company is doing this. So we think of red teaming, we have this Venn model, technology, people, and physical, right? So we have 3 bubbles there, and we can red team one aspect of this, multiple levels are all 3, but usually the center of that is where we're going to start red teaming, right? So if we're just going to look at technology and say the physical security, can we get into your facility and put a drop box? And then once we're on the wire, what can we do, right? So we're going to try to figure out exactly what our target environment is there, and then scope and set up and execute our assessment. So I had some extra bullets in here and I stripped them all out because I just wanted to make sure we really understood this. One of the big benefits, I think, for me, for red teaming, is getting out of our groupthink mentality. So groupthink is something where, as we start to embed into our companies and we start to absorb the culture of the company, we start to all see a certain way. We start to do things a certain way. And so when we start to red team, we're expected to be outside of that box, right? We need to be the ones to challenge that groupthink mentality. This is what we're paid to do at this point. So if you're in a red team engagement and you're expected to be, following certain cultural things, the red team is probably not going to be successful. So groupthink is something we really need to, as security red team folks, we need to start thinking about how do we get out of that process, that thought process, while we're doing this work. Right? TTPs, so what are the real adversaries doing and how are they compromising our organizations? How can we apply those to our assessments? This really boils down to almost every red team engagement is going to be custom built and can be very time consuming and expensive. And I've got some links in the paper. Cisco and MITRE have some really good definitions of TTPs and how they're being used within those organizations. This is probably the hardest thing to put together. This and getting IOCs, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, getting really good threat intelligence of what's going on, what's targeting your organization. Very, very tough to find. So if you have a good threat intel feed and you're a red team, try to get plugged into that process. You can start seeing what your threat intel folks are saying is coming after your organization. What is the SOC seeing? What type of malware is coming after you? Are you seeing those targeted phishing campaigns, the onesies and twosies that are landing in? What are they using? What type of techniques are they trying to use to exploit and compromise some of your senior executives? That's what you need to get plugged into there. So red teaming is really cool. I mean, it's fun, but it's a lot of time and resource intensive. And we got a small team where I work, right? So we don't necessarily have the time or the money to red team everything, right? The ROE, like I said, tends to be more broadly defined. And for some of the environments that I get to work in, we have to really narrow our scope. We don't want to take things down. And that's one of the goals of the red team is we don't want to take systems down. We don't want to damage systems, right? So as I was thinking about this, and I started researching into wargaming and red teaming, I was trying to look for a solution because I wanted to figure out how can I do some of this stuff, but try to incorporate the wargaming aspect into what I wanted to do. And so, started thinking about wargaming computer security. So companies like Intel have been publishing research lo and behold, on how they operate war games internally to test their security controls. DoD also runs war games for their battlefields, both in the real world and in digital space, right? So it seemed like this was becoming more and more of a common practice, and this is something I really wanted to do. But again, I had limited resources and time. And so over the holiday, I found this book online, Fundamentals of Wargaming. This is a book that's being used by the U.S. Naval War College. And I read this book, and it was a really good book if you guys get a chance to read it. But what I was really looking for was how can I test SCADA environments, right? I wanted to get in and do more testing inside of a SCADA infrastructure. And, you know, there's some good stuff in here when I look at purple teaming and how to have like a 4-team purple team engagement, but it wasn't really answering the question I had with which is wargaming. And then finally, and I should have went there first, Raphael Mudge on his blog, Adversarial Simulation, kind of outlined exactly what I was looking for. So I went to the Air Force and got the answer, lo and behold. And so this is the link to his blog post from his site, and that's where I started coming up with the idea of threat scenarios. So what is a threat scenario? So again, we're looking at post-compromise actions. This is really what we're interested in. What happens when the adversary gets in our systems? I hear a lot of companies now that they want to have this zero breach defense mentality. No one's going to get in. Well, I just don't see how you're going to ever have 100% defense, right? So I try to get in the mindset and tell people, at some point somebody's going to land on your network. What happens? So I wanted to show linger time, how long a bad guy sits in your wire. You know, the longer they're there, the better chances are of them getting elevated writes and starting to exfil data. So I wanted to consider this a white box assessment. Since we're really going to scope it down, we could narrow the scope, go after the targets that make sense, and then use adversarial tradecraft, building the TTPs into the scenario, so we get more of like a red team light with goals, right? So I talked about this. This is the white card access. I talked to a couple guys here today that do pen testing, and I kind of explained this to them. This is really cool. If you're doing a pen test and you don't have a shell, just give one of your guys a shell for a couple days. Build that into your ROE. Watch what happens. You know, does Mimikatz work on the network? Did they patch everything properly, or did they forget to write the registry key and it still runs, right? I mean, this is how you find out, by doing stuff like this. So again, for our threat scenarios, we're going to narrow the scope. This is really useful inside of SCADA environments, really good for smaller teams. And we can use this to evaluate the security controls, because now we're watching how the blue team responds. We're working with them. And we can consider this a war game between red and blue, right? So we can coordinate our efforts. So some of the scenarios we can do a paper tabletop exercise where we can actually have a architecture review, have the blue team in with the red team, kind of walk through looking at protocols. Red team guys are going to know how to beat SMB, right? Or RDP or things like that. Blue team's going to know the defensive controls. So as you're walking through this paper exercise, you can kind of say, well, I think I can do this. You could also mix this up and do a paper and a live exercise. Or just go full live assessment, put the red team on the wire, let the blue team listen and see how it plays out. So, is this really just red teaming? No, not really. Again, like I said, we're not just looking at maturity, we're really looking at how everybody is seeing what's on the wire. After we're done with this, the blue team is going to want to provide us with IOCs and supporting data, right? So if they say, hey, we saw everything, okay, well, give us your IOCs, your indicators of compromise, and you can take a look at it with the blue team. Did they actually catch you, or did they just see, you know, some anomalous traffic flying across a sensor but never really responded to it? Right? So again, a way for them to exercise. So how do we set this up? And I am a fan of Cobalt Strike. I don't know if has anybody here used it besides me? Cobalt Strike? What a great tool. This is a great adversarial simulation framework if you have not used it. And so we're going to walk through some steps that you can take to set this up. So if you have a specific system or network you wish to test, then you can write up a scenario and goals. You want to make sure you outline these carefully, right? So you can actually measure them. So an example scenario here is we're walking through this test organization that I have developed. So first bullet, attempt to gain access to the host in the tech subnet. Gain elevated rights on that subnet. We'll pivot over to our server subnet, and then gain elevated rights in that environment. And then we'll move into a SCADA control environment, gain elevated rights there. We'll attempt to sniff various credentials for our SCADA control devices. And then let's try to bypass the two-factor login for that SCADA management system as well, right? So we've now outlined our goals, exactly what we want to do, how we can measure. And so by putting all that together, we'll set up Cobalt Strike. First thing to do, though, is get a copy. $3,500, I think, for a new license, $2,500 renewal. It's a great tool, and it provides excellent post-exploitation agent, covert channel comms, and malleable C2, and I'm going to talk about all these in a second. And it's really good for red teaming. So one of the things I like about Cobalt Strike is that it comes with Beacon. Beacon is a Windows payload and uses bidirectional comms. You can go over named pipes, SMB. You can use DNS text records, DNSA records, HTTP or HTTPS for your C2 channel, right? That's a lot. You can also set up multiple redirectors to call back to your team server. So that way you can have 4 or 5 or how many redirectors you want sitting on the internet. And if you're doing a malware campaign, right, and your blue team is trying to track down all of the C2 channels, that would be your front-end redirectors, right? So as they're shutting those down, you still have multiple of them sitting out there talking back to your team server. And your beacon payload will be able to work with all of those, right? So that's a great way of executing how IR is actually executing within your environment. And again, that's simulating a distributed infrastructure, which we're seeing more and more malware authors leveraging. So here's an example. So we have a Windows machine here going out the firewall of the perimeter. We have multiple beacons set up coming back to 3 redirectors. We also have an interpreter running over HTTPS going over redirector 1, all back to our primary team server. So as we're running this simulation, we can have as many of those redirectors we want. These could be low-power Linux machines running in an Amazon cloud, and then having our larger team server sitting on the back end, catching and doing all of our comms. Right? And then these redirectors actually are running SOCAT, so this is the command that you would run once you have these set up. It's just SOCAT TCP, listening on whatever port, and then forking it over to your back-end server. So malleable C2, this is another thing that Beacon supports. So what this allows you to do is you can change the network indicators of Beacon to actually look like legit malware. So if there's malware that you're wanting to protect against, as long as you can get a PCAP of what that malware looks like on the wire, you can write the malleable C2 front end and tell Beacon how it should look as it's communicating over the wire, and your blue team will see that comm and it will look like that piece of malware. Right? So an example is Putter Panda. Raphael posted this on his GitHub repo. And it's right here. So literally this is a text file. This is the client side. So you can see that it's setting up a URI here. And then he's even got the header vulnerability created inside of the accept. And then encoding the metadata down here. When this actually all gets set up and run, it will look like Putter Panda is on your network and running. So what a great way, again, to test if your IR is actually seeing this stuff, right? And you can create your own. So if you have malware samples that you're catching internally, you want to do an assessment like this. If you've got Cobalt Strike, you just create your malleable C2 profiles and you can start running your campaigns. And you can do this for multiple types of malware. So for me, this is really cool. If we want to get in and actually test more sensitive networks, this is what I like to use. I like to use Cobalt Strike. Beacon is our communication for our payload, and APT simulation is outstanding. And post-exploitation work, things like Empire. Anybody here heard of Empire before? Harmjoy? It's a PowerShell host exploitation framework developed. So you can run Empire through this as well. Outstanding. Now, we do have options here if we don't want to buy Cobalt Strike. We could actually use known malware samples and run those during our assessment. Now, I would not do that unless you do a pretty good code review before you run this stuff on your network. But things like Dark Comet, Ghost Rat, Bifrost are all examples. We can run those and set off the alarms and make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to on the wire. But again, make sure we look at the code before you run it. But that's all online. You can download that freely. Just use at your own risk. Another thing to consider is where you want to drop your C2, whether you want to have it inside your perimeter or out on the internet completely. Now, we've ran some engagements where we've actually had our C2 channel sitting on the inside, just because in some of the environments we didn't want to maybe expose a C2 channel. Maybe you're a new program stepping up and you don't necessarily want to put a team server just yet out onto the internet. You can do that, no problem. You just need to coordinate with the blue team and make sure that they know you're hosting things internally, and maybe you just define that you just want to see if they can actually see the traffic first. That's one way of getting people kind of comfortable of doing these type of assessments. DNS registration. So if you start thinking about doing phishing campaigns where you actually want to land phishing emails inside of somebody's inbox, or you want to actually have these C2 channels sitting and having your own domain, you're going to want to start baking some of those DNS records now. So a lot of organizations look at time that the DNS record's been registered as a signature if it's malware. Usually they'll be just a few days old, and that'll be a signature that somebody says, oh, this could be potentially malware. What I like to do is have a couple of DNS records that will sit and bake for 6 months or a year, and I never use them. And then I'll plan an engagement and pull one of those out and put it on the wire and run it over HTTPS, right? So a more targeted advanced threat actor who maybe has been planning for a long time, and then they execute their campaign. Let's see how the blue team handles that, how they respond to that. So again, setting up your DNS probably be a good place to start too. And then looking at cloud service providers. So Amazon, I think, is a pretty good choice, but there's a bunch of them out there. Again, setting up your redirectors and your C2, your team server, something that you can spin up some images pretty quickly, pretty cheaply. You're going to want to look at some of that. And then we look at traffic generation, right? So we're building our infrastructure, and we now want to simulate large amounts of traffic leaving our network, right? How do we get people interested in what's happening, right? Is it just traffic, or is it just C2 channels, or all of a sudden are we seeing large amounts of traffic flow out the front door? So Metasploit has something called BSides, which I don't think this got a lot of support, but it's still there. So we have things like, there's a couple of auxiliary modules called PII, email PII, and web PII. So those can simulate PII data leaving either through email or through web traffic, and using Metasploit to do that. Now, Chris Trunzer wrote a tool called Egress Assess. It's written in Python, and you can run this tool to generate, to simulate SSNs or credit card numbers actually leaving your infrastructure, right? That's a good way of getting some traffic moving during a simulation as well. You could also write something in PowerShell where you can just create bogus documents, just metadata inside of these bogus documents, and then send them out over like an HTTP connection and see if somebody is targeting or alarming on the metadata, depending on how your DLP solution is set up. Or you could just grab an ISO and push it over a connection, right? A few gigs of data, and see if that doesn't wake somebody up, right? All these are great solutions for getting traffic to move out of the network and get somebody looking at it going, what's going on, right? So let's kind of walk through this real quick. Any questions so far? I'm kind of plowing through these, and I don't want to make sure I'm losing anybody. So Acme Gas, let's talk about this. So again, we're going to walk through this threat scenario. This company has created a new control network design. They've contacted the red team and said, hey, we want you guys to analyze this infrastructure. Tell us if it's hackable, right? tell us what happens if somebody does break into this. So we put together a threat simulation. We're going to run this over a week. It's going to be a full technical simulation. So I have a Visio design here, just kind of put together real quick. So we have 3 different subnets: the tech subnet, the server subnet, and our control subnet. Tech subnet is where our workstations are sitting. They'll have an internet connection coming in. Either firewall or router device sitting between there and our server subnet. And then again, another firewall, probably either control firewall or whatnot, sitting between the servers and the control subnet. So we have multiple domain controllers, web server, mail server, and then we have our SCADA control boxes on the back end, a couple of jump hosts, etc. So for our threat model, the company was concerned about hacktivism. They've been in the news because they're building a new pipeline, right? And that natural gas pipeline has kind of landed them in the sights of a hacktivist group. This hacktivist group's been posting things and threats online that's landed them in a threat intel report. So we're going to look and see if this subnet can actually detect malware once it's been deployed on the infrastructure. We're looking at the tech subnet, which has an internet connection. This is where the technicians can download patches, software updates, and then actually take them into some of those environments and apply them. Within the server subnet, there is a limited internet visibility and absolutely no internet visibility within our control subnet. It's completely isolated. The control network has PLCs and other SCADA systems running BMP3 and Modbus. So we have to be very limited on what we can do there. So no mass Nmap scans are allowed in that environment. We have to be very targeted when we're inside of there. Hacktivists are a high-risk threat at the moment. So again, the concern is social engineering campaigns or pretexting. So we're going to look at our Carver to make sure that we're kind of accurate. The tech subnet, because it's accessible to the internet, it seems like this is where we're going to focus our attention. This is where we're going to white card our access in first, right? We talk about the white card access deploying our payload. I carvered up the tech subnet, the server subnet, and the control subnet. And because of that access, that's why we're going to start in there. That's where we want our white card to be. So the threat scenario is we're going to attempt to get elevated writes on 2 machines, 3.15 and 3.16, which we could go back here and look. That is these 2 machines here. Those 2 machines would more than likely have some type of interface that's connecting directly to our PLC so they can control them. So within a SCADA environment, I necessarily don't have to hack the PLCs. I have to hack the machines that are controlling them. Once I can demonstrate I have elevated writes on those machines, I can control everything within them. Right? We're also going to demonstrate that a threat actor could impact the control network either by controlling those servers, which in this case are running Windows 2003. We're going to try to bypass the two-factor login at 3.25, which is also in our control subnet. And if successfully bypassing that, we could show that a threat actor or team can impact the flow of natural gas within that environment. So again, we outline our ROE. This is all of the things we've talked about so far. I think I added in here too, we wanted to deface the web page because the hacktivists hate this company. So in this scenario, I'm just going to kind of walk through a couple of these. We'll talk about it. This initial machine here, this would be our white card access onto the box. We have a team server sitting on the internet that's got a callback, and that would be our initial beacon payload, our initial foothold from there. Right? So it'd be a low rights user account access on that machine. So first thing we want to do then, once we get access to the box, is we're going to try to elevate our privileges, run Mimikatz, use like a Kerberos silver ticket attack. Any of those attacks that we see client side, we want to get elevated rights on that machine. That's the first thing we want to do. Once we do that, then we're going to try to pivot off that infrastructure onto other machine, or off that machine into other machines, using things like PSExec, whatever might be sitting out there. Persistence is the key, so we're going to try to stay on the wire as long as possible during this assessment. And again, Empire is going to be our friend. So at some point, our team gains elevated rights in the tech subnet. Right? So we've moved lateral, we've owned all the boxes. Using like NL test, we're going to run and find out exactly which machines we're logged into now. Right? Which server am I logged into? I'm going to run that command. And then now we're going to try to pivot over into our server subnet. Right? So in this image, that's exactly what we've done. We've owned a mail server We've got a foothold on the domain controller. But at this point, we've created an account in the domain admins group just for giggles. The blue team now sees us, right? So the blue team is now starting the hunt. They're seeing malicious activity happening on the network. They're seeing it originating from these machines, right? So they're now looking for us. They're now trying to figure out what's going on. So as the blue team develops the hunt, the red team starts to deface the website. And we're not talking about super craziness here. We could just add a comment saying the red team was here on blah, 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 date and time, right? Done. As long as we have the rights to write to that page, that's really all we need to do. But the red team does notice that there's a jump host sitting at 2.50. That's very interesting to us, right? So again, we'll walk through our scenario here. Blue team has determined that one of these machines down here was actually being used to do some of this malicious activity. They've cut our access. So we know that we're running out of time. The gig is up, right, as the red team. So we're trying to push our access and do more and more on the wire as we go along. And the game would continue, right? So I'm not going to do this all day with you, but you see what I'm talking about, right? So this is a war game. So we're playing, but we're also learning as we're going along and doing this. And not every one of these engagements have to be a war game. We could actually just do this as threat simulation. But the goal here would be, as we learn, the blue team is learning as well. They're learning how to respond. They're learning how their tools work. This was something that in the previous talk the gentleman was saying, train as you fight. So a lot of folks, they never really walk through these IR processes, right? They're looking at that one lead guy that knows everything, and it's like, I don't know what to do. Right? I don't know what to do, but if you start exercising these, then everybody can become that lead person in that role, right? So again, we're assuming compromise here via phishing, email, and then really at that point, we're just trying to see what happens post-exploit. So from the blue team, what do we want to look for? So we've run this exercise, we're done. So how does the blue team need to respond to us? Things we want to know is, did the IOC create a log? So after we did something on the machine, after we compromised the machine, was there a log event that was captured? Was the log collected by the monitoring tools? Right. So not only was there a logging event that was created, but our tools picked it up. There was a rule that existed, and an alert from the parsing data. So the rule existed someplace, and an alarm was fired. And did it fire properly, and did they respond? And what activity was prevented by defensive tools? Right. So did everything work the way it was supposed to? Did the blue team respond, and did anything get blocked? You can throw this in a spreadsheet and go step by step through your outbrief and say, this is what happened. This is what we saw. Right? So now we're looking at our report. So this report's going to go to the security team. Cobalt Strike does have timelining reports, so we can actually go back to the blue team and show them exactly what we did at specific times. And this is going to be very key for them, because this is how they're going to get better. We can also provide them with MD5 hashes of all the payloads we use, so they can actually go back and look. This is where the red team needs to be honest about what we were doing. So if we're trying to learn and trying to teach, you can't say, well, I really can't discuss that PowerShell payload. You have to open the kimono. Right? You have to help them, because that's what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build. So, for example, Cobalt Strike has an IOC report, indicators of compromise. And again, an example of that. It's our command and control traffic from a beacon payload. This was a get and then the response coming back from the Apache server. So we can provide that to the blue team and show them, here's an IOC from the beacon payload we were using, whether we were using some type of malleable C2 or we were just going straight out of the box with it. MD5 hashes, we can do that too. So for all of our payloads, here's all the MD5 hashes and the file size. So if they actually find a DLL or something we were using, they can go back and compare it and say, yep, this is what they were using, and go back through their tools. So our activity report, if you can see this, this is date and time down to the minute on the host and actually what we were doing. So the activity coming back initial beacon, we're dumping hashes, we're going to spawn a reverse HTTP back to our team server. I mean, that's line by line, right? So they can then go back through their logs and compare what we did with what they saw. And they can say, hey, hey, all these PowerShell things, we didn't see any of that. Maybe we should upgrade to PowerShell 5 on our Windows machines because we're not catching the logs we need to, right? So this is outstanding for the blue team. And then our session report, exactly what we're doing. So which port we were communicating out over which protocol, our activity check-ins, and then file hashes. We can narrow that to a session, a workstation we were setting on. So if we were working on one of the machines in the tech subnet, we could show them exactly what we were doing and over which communication ports. And then pivot path is really cool because they can actually see how many different connections and hops we had to take as a red team to get into that server structure. So for the example here, we had a host that's a file server. We exploited and communicated over SMB back to this workstation, again over SMB, and then pulled it out to the C2, or over C2 over port 80, right? So 3 different pivots to get out to the public internet. And that's kind of cool for the blue team to see, because a lot of times they're like, yeah, how did you get that? Oh, I didn't realize we had SMB exposed in that infrastructure. Oops. We should probably turn that off or try to limit that or control how we're using that. So, closing thoughts. To me, threat simulations, a white box approach to performing some of the aspects of a red team engagement with a much more narrow scope, allowing us to do deeper assessments on the network without having to spend weeks in doing a red team engagement. More focused. It's going to allow us to get into those environments that are more sensitive, control networks, etc., and test some of those areas where people may not be really cool or comfortable with us going into. And this is more than just a red team saying, well, I have DA, we're done. Right? I mean, that's crazy. Do more than just say, hey, I got domain admin on the network. Show me what could a normal user do on that network. They have access to data that they shouldn't have access to. To me, threat simulations are a way that you can run war games within your infrastructure between red team and blue team that allows everybody to train and build their skills together. It can be a team building exercise, and I think it's a great way to learn more about how we do our work. So, further reading on this, there's a Applied Critical Thinking Handbook, which is a red teamer handbook. I think the U.S. Army uses that book. There's the Cyber Exercise Playbook, which is, I think, MITRE. Then the SANS red teaming book. And then for you blue teamers that are in the room, the Endgame Hunter's Handbook. That is how you hunt. And the guys at Varus helped write that book with them. So Varus's hunt team that goes out with the red team and actually helps those guys do red teaming, they have been rewriting that book, and that is the de facto hunter's handbook for finding adversaries on your network. So I think those are really cool red teaming and blue teaming sources. At the end of the day, we're all in the same group, right? It's not red team, it's blue team, it's purple. So that's my talk. I'm going to open it up to questions. Did I nail time, Brad? Am I over? Okay. Questions? Yes, sir.
What kind of labs are you using to practice these things on? Outside of your own, I mean, are you using a third-party cloud-based services?
So that's a really good question. What the question was, what kind of labs are we using outside to set this up and to work on some of this? And honestly, the answer is I don't have a good lab at the moment to practice this, other than stuff doing like OSCP, OSCE type of certification work. So I would say my lab space is kind of limited. I know a lot of companies want labs, and they're tough, right? They're tough to justify getting racks of gear and setting up stuff and getting a cyber range set up. There are solutions that are coming. I've heard some rumors that the state of Ohio might have a cyber range being built, and my boss may or may not be working with some of that. I don't know what I can talk about, but there may be something coming, but I know that there are some cyber ranges out there being created. The Collaboratory in Columbus, if you're part of the member companies of the Collaboratory, I think they have a pretty nice lab set up over there. But for me, I don't have a lab.
That's not working.
Is that where you work? Okay. Woo, you got a free shout out to the Collaboratory. Yeah, it's tough.
It's one of the challenges even as we develop our lab, if we build it and we hack it, fun, we know it's in there. So trying to get more stuff that's outside of it.
So I will say this: OffSec, the offensive security guys, used to have a service that you could buy. It's pricey, like 40 grand or 50 grand, whatever it is, a year per person. But it's a full year of VPN access into a private virtual infrastructure. And you get a web interface, you can control all the VMs. And these systems are built to look real world. And you can go in there and fire your tools, and it's just like having OSCP lab access, right? So you're going to see WordPress sites that are broken, or Tomcat servers that are vulnerable, or some crazy mail application that you have to, get the public exploit and kind of massage it a bit to get everything to line up just right, to get your return address to line up just right. So there are options out there, but they're not cheap for labs. So
Mantic has a subscription service you can sign up for. SANS has their NetWars online you can sign up for, but yeah, nothing's cheap.
Nothing's cheap, not in this space. So,
and VulnHub just doesn't cut it.
So what I would say is go back to your organizations, plug into their network, and just start owning stuff. Can we erase that? Yeah, don't do that. But I wish there was a cheap solution for us there. But that was a great question. Any other questions? Don't be shy. Any? 3, 2, 1. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you to BSides for hosting this. Has been a pretty good con. So if you see somebody from BSides that was here helping organize it, shake their hand, give them a hug. DerbyCon hug, right? Because we're all in the same family. We're all security folks. Everybody in our organizations hates us because we have to give them bad news all the time. So everybody, thank you. Have a great week.